and good evening, and welcome to another program with Education Matters and Jim O'Connell. You're welcome. Today is May the 8th. The year is flying by, and we're here in the usual predicament of talking about budgets in the city of Manchester and what we're going to cut and what we're not going to cut, etc. And last night's meeting, there was a meeting last night of the Board of Mayor and Aldermen, at which the Superintendent, Dr. Vargas, and Director of Finances, Karen DeFrancis, and Vice Chairman of the School Board, Art Beaudry, made a presentation to the Board of Mayor and Aldermen. I was hoping to get that slide deck in anticipation and preparation for this program tonight, and I wasn't ever able to get it. So I'd like to go through it at length, and hopefully we'll do that next week. But suffice it to say, it's the same old story, just a different year. There are some changes, and we'll get into those in a second. But when it's funny, it recently, in the last 4 or 5 months at least, local public television here in Manchester has added a channel out on Channel 97, if you're living in Manchester, where historical meetings of the aldermen and of the school board and other things are played there every day, and it's for those of us with an interest in local governance and government. It's interesting to look back, and we see these meetings. They may be boring to many, and I don't suggest spending the day looking at them, but you go back and you look at the conversation. I flick by there and I'll see a conversation from 1995 or 1996, where people are discussing the Manchester schools and other things too. And by the way, there's often interesting stuff on there. They had a whole piece on just a chronology of the building of the what is now the SNU Centre, the former Verizon Centre, and it shows its construction from the moment that it was first laid out to the moment it was completed. So anyway, Channel 97, I go out there. So I jump out there once in a while, and I find myself looking at faces of people, some of whom I recall, but many who are long gone, at least from the political fray. And it's disturbing to see, in one sense, how little has changed. And so I find that bothersome that we can't seem to get out of this rut. But let me start today, just as I often do, with what's coming up. We have Dr. Vargas's, the last of his meetings with the community, just on general topics about schools, etc., are coming up. The first one tomorrow morning, May the 9th, at Smith Road Elementary School at 7:30. So if you're going to be dropping your kids off at Smith Road, or if you're around tomorrow morning and would like to engage with the superintendent or listen to him, it's usually a half an hour or so. But so he will be at Smith Road tomorrow morning at 7:30 a.m. And then the last of these engagements with the community will be on May 15th. So that would be a week from today, and it's in the afternoon, and it's at MST, the Manchester School of Technology, and it's on at 4:30 p.m. And if you have an interest in if you have questions, you want to know what's going on, etc., then that's a place to do it. And I'm just reminded that something I don't want to go into here today, but it was a pretty minor issue that somebody was sharing on social media yesterday, and I'm all for sharing and people talking, etc. But some a message that had come from a teacher to a parent, and now the parent was escalating the issue to social media, but had not actually engaged further, hadn't approached the assistant principal, the principal, etc. And there's often and if we were to go through that process of actually approaching things the way they should be approached, if I had a problem with a teacher for one of my children, what I would do is I would go and I would approach the teacher first, either by telephone or email. And if I wasn't satisfied after having a thoughtful exchange with them, then I would go to the administrator in the school, the assistant administrator, or the principal. And I would expect that most things would be resolved at that point, and whatever's not resolved at that point gets escalated to the district and eventually to the superintendent. And after that is the time to sort of throw one's hands up in exasperation and say, oh, the school district, I can't get satisfaction, I don't know. Because I often see threads going on in social media about stuff, and I don't jump in because I don't want to be putting my fat fingers all over it. But I see conversations going on. I look down through as the thread is expanding, and there are people saying things that continue to be totally inaccurate. They're just and it's not, I don't think anybody's in there, or few at least, are in there deliberately spreading false information. It's just that they don't know what they're talking about. Now, as an example, we've had people call into this program recently, and by the way, let me say, you're very welcome to call in. The call-in number is 640-3091. That's 640-3091. We've had a number of people call in over recent weeks, and a couple of them had mentioned the idea of the sending towns and the problem with the sending towns. And I don't understand where this issue with the sending towns continues at this point, when we've gotten to the point where most of the sending towns are no longer sending kids here anyway. We're at the very end of the process where the last 20s and 30s are left in the schools, and they're aging out, going out through the end of their senior years, and yet you have people who obviously have some interest in education because they're watching this program, and they bring up the issue of the sending towns and difficulty with the sending towns, and I find that frustrating, just because that was a canard that went on, a red herring that went on in this district for years, where you couldn't talk about the problems with Manchester education and what the city should do about our school system, because people would say, well, our problem is we've all these towns outside sending in kids and we're spending money on that, and if we could, if we charge them more money, then that would solve the problem. It's because we're being bled to death by the people of Hooksett and Candia and Auburn and originally Bedford. None of which was true when it was being said, because it was not true back then. The towns were paying a contracted rate that was negotiated and agreed upon, and some were paying part of our capital costs for our expansion of schools or creation of schools originally, etc., and their maintenance, etc. So they were paying the loaded cost of having their children here. And the whole argument that was had by those who during that time was, this is the source of the problem. We got to eliminate that and we'll be all set. I have to say that any rational person looking at the numbers back then could tell that that wasn't the problem. It was an excuse. So when you were talking to somebody who was in Manchester and you said to them, look, we spend less on education per student than every other town. We have more packed classrooms and less teachers per student than any other town in the state, and they'd go off for years about the surrounding towns. Some of the current board members of the current board of school committee, it was one of their favorite things to do, and so there couldn't be any clarity about the real issues because that's what you end up talking about. I find it frustrating that long after Bedford is gone, when there's a dribble left from Hooksett of whatever it is, 20, 30 students or something, out of the 14,000 students that we have, when Candia is gone and Auburn's gone, and we still have people uninformed. But obviously they care. If they were just uninformed, they were sitting on a bar stool mumbling about it, fair enough. But these are people who are thinking about, why am I paying taxes? What am I getting? What value am I getting in return for them? Are there issues with our schools? What are they? So these are people who are engaged in the school debate, and a substantial minority of them are not even aware that we don't have people coming from sending towns anymore. So how can you have a rational discussion around that topic when sort of major facts are missing? So then that brings us to this this issue that we have today, where people want to talk about, the problem is with unfunded federal mandates or something, which is another canard, another red herring. It's not, when you ask people to name what the federal mandates are, they find it difficult to name what a federal mandate is. And we go back to the special education piece, which I wouldn't describe as a federal mandate. I think that all of these programs are inadequately funded. So we have a fundamental problem in our school district where year over year we have a board of mayor and aldermen who prove themselves to largely be uninformed about what's actually happening in our schools. And I'm not trying to disrespect any of the members of the board, mayor and aldermen. They have a lot of functions to oversee and a lot of departments, and there are a lot of things going on in this city on any given day. And I'm sure their phones ring regularly with lots of different things. But what they are guilty of, I think, is having these unfounded notions based on no real information that they continue to talk about. So without getting into the specifics, at the end of last night's meeting, we had a debate about the issue of whether people were leaving Manchester or not because of the school system. And I found it just disturbing that we are having a conversation amongst 15 intelligent people whose job it is to manage the city and its future, and they're actually debating this. Because if you strip away the verbiage, I don't think there's anybody claiming, and because there's no evidence of a mass exodus of population from the city of Manchester because of schools. Note I'm saying mass exodus. There's also so I don't believe anybody who's claiming that, because I don't think it's true. It's also clear that there are families leaving Manchester constantly because of the school system. Those are two separate ideas now for those of you who are not paying full attention, right? So, having I-93 full of carloads and U-Hauls of people driving down to other towns and north to other towns and out to Bedford and up to Goffstown and Hooksett and down to Londonderry, that's not true. But any realtor in the state of New Hampshire, or anybody involved in relocation or having companies bringing new families here or employees here, they will tell you to a man or woman that there's no question but that people don't want to move into the city of Manchester because of the school system. So we can build wonderful residences like the flats on Hanover Street, which are micro apartments. We can build the apartments that we're building that are being developed on the Ted Hebert Music Building. We have the lofts over on in the Mill buildings. We have Bill Benny's building, the Citizens Bank building, where we're developing where there's demand for those properties. The Manchester Place properties on the corner of Bridge and Elm Street, there's demand for those properties. So yes, there are things happening in Manchester. So there are people, lots of them young people, or employees coming in to work in businesses. They have to come in from outside because we don't have the population here in order to manage it. What we don't see to the same degree is a husband and wife with two pre-K kids choosing Manchester to move into. Now, gladly, it's not the end of the world, and it's not doom and gloom, because it's not like nobody's moving in. But the major thing that is retarding the growth of the city of Manchester and its vibrancy is the issue of our schools. Because when people go in and they do a Google search on facts about the schools, some things jump off the page, and they see that if they put their kids into the Manchester School District, that the class size is going to be higher than it is it's going to be higher than it is anywhere else in the state, actually, on the average across all the schools. And and also that the amount of money that is spent on those kids is lower than it is that is spent on by other surrounding towns. And people will say to you, why should I come to Manchester and purchase a house in Manchester where my kid is going to go into a class with 28 kids in it, when I can just buy a house down the street, by a mile and a half, and I can go into a school district where there'll be to 18 kids in it. And I find it just terribly disturbing that the 14 people, 15 including the mayor, sitting around last night at the end of the budget are having a discussion about this issue. And I find it, so we have people saying that Alderman Levasseur made note of the point that sort of the idea that there aren't any empty houses, therefore people can only move out if they can sell their houses, and so they're able to sell them. So if they sell them, and he talked about his own neighbourhood, a nice neighbourhood that he lives in up off of Wellington Road, and that a number of properties were sold there and they were on the market for 30, 60 days, or if they want a lot of money, maybe 90 days. And yeah, but what, and that's fine. I'm sure that's true. I agree with him. I'm sure it's true. But what does that tell us? As I said to Mayor Gatsas a number of years ago about families moving out of Manchester, and the same argument was used. Well, there aren't any empty houses. And my point was, are we going to wait until it looks like, post-Depression Detroit, where there are boarded up houses around the city, before we actually say that we should do something? My annoyance, ladies and gentlemen, is just at the fact that everybody knows that this is so. Everybody knows that the schools need improvement. Everybody knows that they've been doing a wonderful job for a long time while operating under these constraints. And so the fact that we still have to have these debates at the end of it, I just find I find amazing. And that's what's most disturbing. And then people get down into the weeds of the numbers. And when you're looking at a $170 million budget, or $190 million if you include all sources, and federal, state, and other sources, you can get buried in any line item. And we saw this last night with the presentation that Dr. Vargas gave, and Mr. Beaudry, who I know is somebody who does realize that our schools need more resources. He goes to the issue. They talk about the issue of the school nurses, and that we needed to have a discussion between the Board of School Committee and the Health Department about how much we were paying for nurses. And his point was that because the school district works 175 days plus snow days or something, that we were actually paying nurses for a full year, which was 195 work days, whatever it was, and therefore there was this percentage difference. And how come we were paying for them on those hours? The other thing he talked about was, the length of the school day and the times, But in the end, I was thinking to myself, what would he expect the health department to do? The health department has, whatever it is, 15 or 20 nurses employed in our schools. That's their job. Tim Soucy from the health department has made it plain, I think, as I remember, if this was something, if the school district's not happy with that and they can get qualified nurses elsewhere, then fine. There just aren't. You can't find nurses who are going to work for less money than the ones working for the Manchester School District or the Manchester Department of Health right now. So I just find it annoying that we're talking about that issue, which is a source of it immediately creates a divide between the Board of School Committee and the Board of Mayor and Aldermen. Because if I'm an alderman, what I'm hearing is the school board doesn't want to pay the full cost of these nurses being supplied by out of the Department of Health. And if they want a reduction, which is what they were looking for, Mr. Beaudry was talking about, whatever it is, if it's 10% and it represents $100,000 a year, whatever that number is, it's money that's going to have to come out of the city's budget. And so it's a divisive topic, I would suggest to Mr. Beaudry, that it's a divisive topic to start there. I understand what he's saying. I understand his frustrations around it. But in the end, I don't believe that that Tim Soucy or the city is sort of giggling up its sleeve about. Oh, we caught, we're look. It just, the money's not there. There isn't anything untoward happening. It's just the nature of what's going on. And I'm much more concerned with the fact that we already have the in that presentation, at the end of that presentation, instead of talking about the 20 egregious things that we might actually talk about, this is where we decide to shine the light. When Dr. Vargas was making the point that we need social workers in our middle schools, and anybody who believes we don't need social workers in our middle schools, frankly, just doesn't know what they're talking about, because with a population of 900 per middle school, and with the intention of adding fifth grade, which will bring them to somewhere around the 1,200, 1,100, somewhere in there, into that mark. But currently, 850, approaching 900 per middle school. Those, on any given day, there are children in those schools who have all kinds of issues. And besides talking about the most egregious issues, the most dramatic issues, just think about, a kid who is having some smaller issue in their life, some little traumatic for a little kid, but not of the most serious nature. Well, without a social worker in the school, who's going to manage that? Well, you could have the assistant principal, who's already maxed out, spending their day, handling numerous administration issues. Who, I see assistant principals who have zero time to spend on education, in the classroom, working with teachers, because they're full-time working on administrative functions around kids who have court dates, kids who have disciplinary issues, kids who are in and out of the criminal justice system, families transferring, from one district to another as fast as you can. I mean, it's amazing on any given day. I think it's true that in most schools in Manchester, on any given day, there is a family either moving in or moving out. And that may be a slight exaggeration, because it might be every second day. But there's no question but that if you did the numbers, that in any given week, there are families moving in and out of our schools. So paperwork, transcripts, etc., have to be prepared and organized and sent to some school where they're going to. And often, of course, we have kids who, not everybody communicates and tells you that, the two Smiths haven't been in school for the last 3 months, but actually they're now living somewhere in Ohio. So all of that's going on all day, every day. Little Mary walks in the door and she's having some difficulty. And who's going to deal with her? The teacher with the 30 kids in the class, who's already maxed out trying to just teach the subject that she or he is there to teach. So where does the kid with that extra piece of need go? And the truth of the matter is, we have kids with very serious needs, not with little needs. So besides the kids we have who have specific, education plans and have specific educational conditions, etc., and those of special needs, we have kids, besides that set of children, we have kids in any day in our any one of our schools. There's a child whose mother or father has overdosed in the last 48 hours or week, or their sister or brother has, or their aunt or uncle has. That's a daily occurrence on any given day. There are kids whose dad has just left and the parents have just told everybody they're divorcing and getting out. There's alcoholism, there's criminal activity, there's terrible behavior, there's abuse, there's physical abuse, there's sexual abuse. There's a million things, not just the things that sadly these things happen to actual children themselves. But even if they don't happen to the children to themselves, they're happening to a sister or brother, an aunt, an uncle, a neighbor, a first cousin, or somebody in their tight family circle. And they're traumatized by it or disturbed by it. And they walk into school, and that kid is not ready to listen to, what year was the Civil War fought, or reading the next chapter of their play or book or whatever. So the idea that the superintendent of schools, who's the most qualified person to decide what he thinks our schools might need, that he comes before the Board of Mayor and Aldermen last night and says, we're actually going to be eliminating teachers again this year, because that's part of the plan. We're eliminating teachers but they are going to be they'll be lost through non-renewal of positions, etc. Because people have to be in the, contrary to public belief about tenure and you can't get rid of teachers, etc. Any teacher up until their at the end of their 5th year teaching in Manchester, they have to be here 5 years. Up until 5 years, even if you're a great teacher or a not so good teacher, you can be eliminated without cause. Just the district can say we don't require your services after this year. It's only when you get beyond that you have to give proper notice, etc. To you can still get rid of people. You can certainly RIF people, reduce in force. If the district ever decided it wanted to reduce its workforce by 100, around 10%, it could do that. It just has to give them notice by a certain time in the year, and then it happens. So this once again this year we're going to have not firings, it appears. So there'll be no reduction in force where people will get a pink slip and be told you're being eliminated. But there will be people who won't be renewed, who are not up to that 5-year period, and there will be people who are retiring and leaving the district whose jobs won't be replaced. So we're going to have a reduction in workforce. But even with that, we need a number of things. So the ones that jump off the page at me as being easy requirements that should be a check mark for any member of the board, mayor and alderman, would be that the school district, the middle schools need these social workers in the schools. And yet we're having a debate about nurses and the hours that nurses are in, which becomes a tug of war between two boards. I'd like to hear aldermen defend what we're currently doing in our schools and say that we don't need to do any more and everything is fine. And we do hear that from some who frankly just simply don't know what they're talking about. Because they're operating from a lack of understanding of how our schools actually work and what is really going on. I want to switch tack to a minute to the issue of the voucher program and Senate Bill 193. And for those paying a lot of attention, Senate Bill 193 has been going through now this, somebody called it the other day it's a turducken of a bill. So the bill has been struggling and for months and months and months for the whole session in Concord. And this bill basically would allow for public tax dollars, your dollars and mine, to be given to be taken by families. Now, people talk about school choice and they'll say, well, parents should be able to decide where these funds go. Well, that. First of all, that's a load of poppycock too. I mean, if that's the case, then give me back my property taxes in Manchester, and I'll decide how I want them funded. Because maybe I don't like red fire trucks. Maybe I don't need people to rescue me. That I'll sign an indemnity clause and say, you don't have to rescue me if I fall down the stairs. I'll pay for my own ambulance. Maybe I want yellow fire trucks. I want choice, because the red fire trucks, they upset my sense of the aesthetic. So I'm going to have charter fire trucks, yellow ones, and then some other streets will have them. They can be fluorescent green, and we're going to hire those ourselves. So give me back those tax monies. And if you think that's farcical, think about what Senate Bill 193 would do. Senate Bill 193, which was defeated last week, but then was tacked onto a bill at the last minute the other morning or the other night in Concord. So now the original version of the bill, which is an atrocious bill, is the one that's going back to the House for a vote. This would allow for families, regardless of income level, so the richest families in the state could take the portion of the adequacy grant that the state funds education with and keep it to themselves. And so this is something that local school board members in Manchester were up in Concord arguing in favour of. That was committee member Gerard and committee member welcome. Yes, please. We're being joined by a special guest. and we're just talking about school board, so it's apropos. Um, and by Ross Terrio, while he prepares himself, I just so to finish with school Senate Bill 193, which sadly is still not dead. Yeah, join us, Ross. Welcome. I'm glad you could make it. Thank you very much. Good to meet you, I love Ross.
All my Gaelic Ross. That I know. I know one other thing, but it's not a nice thing.
It's not a not
kiss my behind.
Yeah. Pogue Mahone.
Yeah.
Pogue Mahone. So you can say it in Gaelic because people are sort of unsure of anyway.
I think in Boston, I'm originally from the Boston area. A lot of people, more people have a little bit of kitchen Gaelic, and so they a lot of people know what Pogue Mahone is.
Pogue Mahone. Yeah. They have a lot of that. It's amazing. Now with the internet and all that, right? Now, like it's new, right? When Al Gore invented it, back in 1993. The internet. But I was driving along the other day, and I just I don't know why, but I put on Irish radio. RTE
6:40 a.m.
I put this is from Ireland. This is on the internet. So
the real thing.
The national Radio Telefís Éireann. The Irish, which is RTE, it's like the BBC, but it's the Irish BBC. And so I was listening to the 12 o'clock news, and on Channel 1, and it's Nuacht, which is the Irish word for news, the Nuacht. So it was actually news in Gaelic. So here am I driving down I-93, 20, 30 years after leaving Ireland, struggling to, listen to this, and it was like Connacht accent, and I was smiling to myself because I was able to pick up some of it, But the other thing that just out in left field again is what reminded me of sort of a throwback to Ireland was the news came on this as I put it on my phone, which in the car. The commentator said, and in this beautiful Irish accent, and said, the 12 o'clock news, we're ready for the 12 o'clock news, and before we get to news, we'll break for the Angelus. And so the Angelus is this, they ring the bell. So the Angelus is a prayer that's said by Catholics at 6 a.m., midday, and 6 p.m.
How's the prayer go? Is it Gaelic?
Yeah, it's not. It's in English, but it's so it's a series of. It's about the those people out there who have some more spaghetti. We'll be with you in a second. But so it's actually it has to do with the Virgin Mary, and it's a prayer to the Virgin Mary. So it has you say Hail Mary, Holy Mary, and then you have so the angel appears unto Mary, and she says. Behold the handmaid of the Lord. So it's from the Annunciation. That's the piece that it covers. And there's 4 pieces to it. And I'm embarrassed to say that I've forgotten most of it.
And since we're doing stream of consciousness, I'm going to interrupt you. I actually was in the Church of the Annunciation in Israel.
Oh, were you?
About 20 years ago.
Yeah, nice. That's a special. Those are special places to. So anyway, so it was just a throwback to time to listen to this, to be driving down the street, and it brought me back to my childhood in Ireland, because every evening at 6 o'clock, even on the national television, right, which was like ABC, NBC, we had this RT station. Back then there were only 2 or 3 stations because I'm old, but at 6 o'clock this image would come on and go bong.
And then you would do the prayer?
30 seconds. Well, no, there's silence, right? So you can people would say the prayer.
Okay.
They don't say the prayer.
All
you hear is the bells, bong, bong, bong. But if you think back to sort of someone like Rembrandt's The Potato Pickers, those kind of stuff, right? People out in the fields in Ireland. Picking potatoes or whatever they might be doing out on their farms, and the village church in the valley, would ring its bells at 12 o'clock. And I remember this, that everybody would stop what they were doing. If you were picking berries or picking fruit or picking potatoes often, everybody in the field would stop, and you'd hear the bell, the church peal go bang, bang, and everybody from the youngest to the oldest in the fields would stop, say their prayers, which was like 3-4 minutes. No, not even that, 2 minutes, and then go back to picking. Now, Ireland today, you wouldn't see that happen so much, right? The traffic doesn't stop in Dublin, for the Angelus anymore. But it's amazing to me that in 2018, on the national radio,
that they're still doing
you still have the bong, bong. But you can just imagine here that it would be, But then the other view of, so it's wonderful for us if you happen to be Catholic and Irish and you support all of that and you're part of it, then it's a wonderful thing, right? If you the other side of it, what struck me with a more modern view was like this is like the sort of the prayers coming on in a call to prayer in the mosque, right? That which is fine, I guess, if you're in Saudi Arabia or wherever you might be.
Almost any. I was
or
in
anywhere
Egypt.
for that
I
matter.
was in Egypt, which is it's not as hardcore as Saudi Arabia, but. And I don't have a problem with.
By the way, I wasn't saying that there was any problem with anybody praying anytime, but just having it sort of.
The only thing I didn't like about it was, so I was in Egypt, and they pray 5 times. The Sunnis pray 5 times a day.
Right.
And here's the thing that my problem with it was, and it's perfectly free to do it, is the loudspeaker was right near my hotel room.
Oh, right.
So at 5 a.m. every morning.
Yeah.
They would sing in Arabic,
right.
the call to prayer.
Yeah.
I think they recite the beginning of the Quran, which is like Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, alhamdulillah. But basically, God help me stay on the straight path.
Right.
Don't let me stray
right.
from the righteous path. But anyways, it blasts because they have to announce to whole city blocks, hey, it's time to pray.
Right.
And pray. And so, but the speaker was really close to my hotel room, and so at 5 a.m., just unbelievable.
So my hometown Cove, right, has been named twice in the last 3 years the #1 or 2 cruise port destination in Europe. So if you Googled it right now, COBH, there's like the 3rd largest cruise line in the world was in there yesterday with 4,500 people on it. It's a big cruise port. But there's a big cathedral up on the hill there, St. Colman's Cathedral. And why you remind me of the call to prayer thing was because I've heard even today, I'm not used to it anymore, so it wakes me up when I go back there, and certainly wakes up my family when we go back there. But people who are there don't hear anymore. But every 15 minutes, it has the bells, just like the chimes goes bong 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 bong, and you can tell the quarter after the hour it is, because by the time you get to the 3rd quarter, it does 3/4 of that piece. And then at the hour, it does the whole chimes all the way through. Right. So at the 15 minutes, it just goes bum, 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 and stops. So now you know it's 50, in the middle of the night when you're lying in bed and it's pitch black. You know it's 15 minutes past something. Yeah. You might not know which. And when you get to the hour, of course, it'll do the whole thing, and then it goes, this is 3 a.m., and then it goes bong, bong, bong. But I've had bleary-eyed people numerous times say to me, oh my God, I was up all night listening to those bloody bells, And then it plays, it does the Andrews thing every day at 12 o'clock, and then it does, it's the largest carillon in the British Isles.
What?
The largest carillon. A carillon is a set of bells.
Oh, okay.
So it's got 47 bells and can be played it's like having 47 keys.
Yeah.
So it can be
like a piano, like a half a piano.
Right. So before you go to like diphthongs or what do they call, whatever my music is lost to me, but before you go to blended notes, etc., on single notes you got 47 different notes. And since nobody else is listening to us,
we
just an interesting thing about that, right? So you think about sort of the history of Ireland with the British and all that stuff, right, and the perception of it and the reality of it too. But those bells were actually manufactured and in England, and they were brought, or at least they were brought from England. I don't know where they were manufactured. I presume it was England. But the last of the bells was installed in that cathedral during World War I. And the largest bell is 3 tons or 4 tons. It's a big bell. Yeah. So the biggest one, it's huge. I mean, it's a massive bell. And there are 47 of them in this tower. The tower is 150 feet high. The whole thing's 300 feet tall. So it's got it's a lot of stuff. But anyway, the British Navy, during World War I, there was a British naval destroyer arrived in Cork Harbour with the bell up in front of the destroyer, where the front gun of and there are photographs of this, of the 3 largest bells for what was the Roman Catholic Cathedral in Cork, in Cove. And they're up on the decks of the destroyer as it sails in the harbour. So it was delivered by so despite all the real challenges that were there, the real difficulties, there are those moments of humanity or decency or whatever it happens to be. So enough of that. I think somebody might have listened to talk about education.
I just want to continue on that. You just reminded me of my grandmother when you were talking about the prayer to Mary, because my grandfather, Jerry Theriault, but everybody called him Joseph, is French and Irish Catholic. He was a McGuinness. So his mother was a McGuinness, and his dad was a Theriault, which is French. But he was very good Catholic boy. raised my grandmother, who was Swedish, but she was Lutheran, but she converted Catholicism.
Right.
But for years, she was an angel. She really was a nice human being, just very kind, and think of like Mother Teresa, just very feminine. And
Right.
but she used to have a Mary medallion that after she died, I wore for a long time. And said, I remember when you were talking about that, it reminded me, "Oh Mary, conceived without sin, pray for us who have recourse to Thee."
Yes.
I wore that for
And
many
it was
years.
often written on the back of those medals. So I'm just looking here. So it says here, this is just a quick Google. It says, as with many Catholic prayers, the name Angelus is derived from the inscript Angelus Domini Nuntavit. Where am I? I just missed it. Nuntavit Maria, the angel of the Lord declared unto Mary, and is practiced by reciting as versicle in response 3 biblical verses narrating the mystery, alternating with the prayer, the Hail Mary prayer. So, and that's what's the pieces. I could read the rest of it here, but anyway, it's anybody of Irish, who grew up in Ireland knew what the Angelus was, because in school the classes stopped at 12 o'clock too. The only practical ones were 12 midday and 6 p.m. But it actually was done at 6 a.m. But most of us weren't. Irish people
Sleeping.
Irish people didn't get up until later back then, because it was all agricultural. You got up.
No, there was a song that seems to insinuate that Irish people get up early in the morning. Whiskey in the Jar.
Oh yeah.
Courting young ladies early in the morning.
Yeah, but that actually was just very late at night. If you stay up long enough, it does get brighter. So anyway, so there you go. In the schools, they classes would stop because the Angelus was being said. So how things have changed, but there you go. So tell me,
Sir.
We've got to do a talk about Ireland someday and just do that and nothing else. But since we're in the last night's meeting, I was hoping to get the deck from Dr. Vargas's presentation last night, and I didn't. So. And I couldn't watch the whole thing last night, so I just went from. I was trying to go from memory for the folks watching today, but. So where do you think we are, right? So he's looking for an additional 2 million, saying that there is a requirement for an additional 2 million.
I'm glad you brought that. So I have to plead ignorance because I work nights, but what I
Okay.
do is I take Tuesdays off to accommodate the school board, and I use my vacation to take Mondays off,
Okay.
so I can be it. But I because last night's meeting was an alderman meeting,
Okay.
and I didn't
I
find
forgot.
out
Yeah,
about
of course,
it.
yeah.
It wasn't there, but I actually wanted to. Joyce Craig, wonderful human being. I like her as a person. I think she's in between a rock and a hard place. She's got the tax cap.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think she wants to. But she wants to try to do everything within the tax.
Yeah.
People say. I know some of my Republican colleagues say, "Oh, Joyce is a big spender." Maybe in her heart she'd like to. She wishes she had a pot of money to spend on pet
But isn't that
projects.
true of everybody?
Yeah.
Don't you think everybody would like to have a pot of money?
Well, some people no, maybe.
Oh, those are just those are curmudgeons,
yeah.
right? So,
But I really believe that she wants to live within the tax cap in this
I think
budget.
she sees it as a political reality.
A reality, but also I don't think she wants to be a one-term mayor. And maybe
Right.
she feels that if she busts the tax cap,
Yeah.
that the taxpayers will abandon her, and what goodwill she would have, she would, not that she would lose, but it would be a very tight
Yeah.
re-election if she was able to. So I don't believe that she wants to bust the tax cap, and I don't think that the school district will get little, if any, money above the tax
Right.
cap budget. Further, and to make this even worse, what are those little rubber doll things that you squeeze? You know, the little squeezy things, and the head will get bigger or the body will get bigger. You know what I'm talking about.
I do, but I don't know what. No, yeah.
That's the Manchester City budget, because any money that you go above the tax cap, let's say on the city side,
Right.
Let's say you then you have to take from the schools,
right.
Or if the school goes above the tax cap, then you've got to take that from the city
And so
side.
the answer would be stop
So
squeezing.
it's-
Stop
it's-
squeezing.
So everything's interconnected.
Right.
So this is why she's even in a tougher place.
Right.
Because not only do the schools want more money, because as you know,
Yeah.
one of the poorest funded districts in the state.
Right.
But you have all of these people that supported Joyce, like the police and the fire and the
Right.
different city unions, who were now wanting, for instance, want above a tax cap budget for their negotiations.
Right.
I don't think they're going to get it, and so
Right.
they're going to be very unhappy with Joyce.
Yeah.
And so I really don't believe that if there's going to be very little. If she busts tax cap, it's not going to be by much.
And so that's why I would like to blow it all up, because the conversation is entirely false. I don't think that the people of Manchester are so defeatist and so backward looking and uncompassionate as to want to continue. If the facts were known to them, that they would continue in the way they're going. I think that people, insofar as anybody does support a tax cap, I think people want fiscal responsibility. They want no wastage. They don't want any jobs for the boys, and this perception they might have of sweetheart deals or whatever else people I don't think people even get to the point of narrowing it down to specifics. It's more a general impression of squeeze that thing and they'll find a way of getting it done. But I think it behooves public representatives, someone like yourself, and the mayor in particular, to tell the people that it is how it is. And I'll use this example. So because we see what's happening with educators in other states, for instance, without going into sort of national politics.
Would be going on strike in
Arizona, Wisconsin, Oklahoma, Kansas, Texas, right? I mean, Texas, I don't want to deal with that. We can if you want, but I don't really want to go there.
Actually, just a rhetorical question. And I thought there were certain professions that couldn't go on strike, that they were illegal, like police, firemen. I thought teachers weren't allowed to strike.
Oh, I don't
know.
Not
in the middle of a school year.
Yeah,
I didn't think
I don't know if there's any provision. I don't even know if there's a provision around the other services either. I think that might be a state by state, city by city thing. I don't know if there's a national prohibition on that. but back to it. So we see what sort of this kind of the tax cap thing gives you over time. It gives you teachers leaving in droves. It gives you schools.
I don't see teachers leaving in droves.
No, but not here, but in other states you're seeing it.
Okay.
Right. I'm talking about what the result of these things. So. You can keep going the way you're going, and it's clearly telegraphed in Kansas and Oklahoma where you get to. Like, you can go there if you want, but that's where the trajectory goes. Holding that dollar, whatever that thing is, you want to squeeze with the tax cap, will get you there. So I would say, and I know this is where people think it's rhetoric, and we're just like, but I want to actually use the example of Charles Dickens, Fagin, and More. For Oliver Twist, because I used it. This is how I use the analogy, and I think it works. These arguments that you've just made are correct. I understand them. They're pragmatic. They're logical. I think your defining of where Joyce is very spot. I think that's where it is. I mean, she's stuck between a stone and a hard place, and what can we do, right? Secondly, I don't believe there's any evil there. You know what I mean? There's nobody with. Pulling strings in the background who sort of, but where we have put ourselves is back to this Dickensian problem, and how we describe is that we all sort of have an image of the poorhouse, and poor young Oliver who demands more of the gruel, this terrible slop that he's been given. And I imagine a board of people who were very well intentioned in Victorian England who ran that poorhouse. And I'm sure debates were held on an annual basis about how, the price of carrots has gone up by 10%, and that we either reduce the amount of carrots in the soup or we'll use leeks instead. But you
hit the target. This is actually a true story. And my dad, again, he used to buy Irish history books. I think one was called Paddy's Lament, I believe.
I remember the name, actually.
Paddy's Lament, and it was written. It might have even been written by an Englishman, but he was very sympathetic to the Irish plight. Basically, it was about a lot of it had to deal with, as I recall, the Irish potato famine.
Right. And
what you described about Oliver Twist was exactly correct. So, the potato famine, obviously, there was international news at the time. Right. A lot of countries around the globe put pressure on England. Said, "Look, you have people in British Empire starving to death. That's despicable." So the English got together and said, "What can we do?" But they wanted to save money, so they actually brought in a chef, but like a world-class chef, and said, "We need to feed these." There was like a feeding station. We want to have, we want you to make this very tasty food with what we have, but we have a limited budget. And what they found was, so this 5-star chef that they brought in made great tasting food, but because he was trying to save money, because they gave him a very strict budget, the people were still starving there. There wasn't enough calories in the food that.
Right.
So though he was very creative with what he came up with, it was very tasty.
Well, he was down to
It was not enough nourishment for the people, and they were still suffering from
he was
malnutrition.
still down to potatoes and weeds and stuff. But I want to go. So this my point about the school board and the board of mayor and aldermen. When I heard the aldermen last night, they annoy me actually, and it's not because I dislike.
You got to run for office.
No, but it wouldn't. I don't know if it would help. I'm preaching to the because I remember Alderman Pat Long lost his seat in the last election, and I remember Pat who was a Democrat and wanted to do the right thing and understood the nature of the problem, but he was a pragmatist, just like you are. And he said, "Look, this we can't. This is not going to happen. Like, what do you want here, Jim?" He said, "Give me something, whatever word. Like, give me something small. Like, let's just make some progress. Give me a $50,000 something where whatever." He might have said 30,000, but he said, like, you need to. And he was, and I like Pat. I'm just
I
saying,
do too.
but he was a good guy. But he was just saying, "Look, Jim, you're wasting your time. Like, we're not going. Nobody cares. We've got the least well-funded schools in the state. No one's embarrassed about it. Our 14 public representatives are happy to be on that board, and they'll go into 10 meetings and say, I happen to be one of the people who implement this. Our public representatives are happy to have the most crowded classrooms in the state. They're not embarrassed. They go up and they visit Concord, and they never get blushed when they walk in the room. And they're running this dysfunctional system. And there are children, I don't mean to offer you, Ross, you don't know.
No, feel free.
But there are children all across our city who are falling off the table, so to speak, who are not getting the services that they need. And they're not getting them because there's a group of people holding the line, and they're holding an artificial line that everybody can see based on empirical evidence and comparative analysis. In other words, the application of brain power and intellect determines that we're not spending enough money on our schools. So the question should only be, how do we as a society, how do we as a city here, and as a society writ large in the state of New Hampshire, find a better way of funding our schools? And we're not spending any intellectual capital on doing that. What we're actually doing is finding a way of spending
What I propose, and this is going to go over like a lead balloon, I think we should go the way of Colorado, legalize marijuana and tax it and use it for education. And then part of it needs to be a discussion with Concord. Look at what we spend per pupil. Look at what the state average is. All we want to be is average. We just want. I don't even want to be the highest spending district. I just want to be average. We should give them about $3,000 per kid.
I'd be happy
which would be about $40 million. But so how is that going to happen? Manchester has the most poverty in the state of New Hampshire. It's a wealthy state, one of the wealthiest states.
We're the 6th or 7th wealthiest state on a per capita basis. Yeah.
Yet Manchester has the poorest people.
I actually don't know if that's true. If there's not a town somewhere that does.
Maybe Allenstown.
It's certainly in terms.
We are.
You're largely correct.
I'm assuming if there's
we certainly have the biggest number.
5 poorest municipalities in the state. We would be in that group.
Yes, and we've got the highest number of kids on free and reduced lunch, etc. I just was saying that I didn't want to be silly.
That's why I'd like to see casino gambling.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people think that's evil and going to be corrupting. I'd like to, but as a practical sense, casino gambling and legalizing marijuana, it's a new revenue stream. People aren't going to some people are going to freak out about it, but they're not. It's weird. If you raise money by taxes, people are going to get very upset. But if you raise it by legalizing cannabis, they're not going to be upset.
Well, I don't know. So in most of the states,
some people are going to be upset.
In most of the states of the United States, there's an income tax and there's a sales tax.
Yes.
Right. In most Western democracies, there's income tax and sales tax.
And a VAT, and in New York, my friend in New York has a county tax. He has a city tax.
Right.
He has a sales tax. He has lots.
So that's the way things work, right? That's like how the world works. Now we choose. Alaska doesn't, but then it has oil revenue, etc. We choose we choose to do things in the way we do them in New Hampshire, and we keep on using these postage stamps around, Keno for kindergarten, etc. So, for instance, in my case, I property taxes. I pay property taxes. So, at a time when the times in my life when I was doing very well, then the property taxes as a percentage of my income weren't in order. At times in my life when, because I was in technology for a long time, so I was in and out of company, you ride the bucking Bronco for a while, and then you're like looking for the next one, and you ride that. So, but regardless of what happened, I'm still giving the state and city of New Hampshire, the same amount of money. So when you're paying $7,000 or $8,000 in property taxes, and your income's 50,000. It's a ridiculous amount of
Yeah.
money. And we find elderly people, people on fixed income, in the city of Manchester and the state of New Hampshire who are priced out of their family homes. The whole tradition of having a family home in New Hampshire is affected by this. Most people don't pass down the family home, or many, from one to the next.
Is that based on data?
No, it's not.
Is it
I'm
on
sorry. Yeah,
anecdotal
so on
evidence?
anecdotal
Okay.
evidence. I see it, because I know so many families.
I do
who-
have a coworker whose mother owned a house in Bow.
Yeah.
And he was a pharmacy technician. He probably made at the time probably 35,000 a year.
Right.
And she was nearing the end of her life.
Right.
He's like, I can't. She wants to give me the house. He goes, I just can't afford. Let's say it was $10,000 a year in property
Right,
taxes. He
right.
goes, I can't afford that. We're going to have
Right.
to sell the house. I'm going to have to move. I cannot afford.
And it makes and then when you think about it, if I were just out of college in the state of New Hampshire, we need more people who are just out of college. If I were just out of college, or I was out and I was working, and I have a job, and I'm earning 150K or 120K, and those are not ridiculous numbers for people who think they're ridiculous. They're actually not ridiculous numbers in the state of New Hampshire. We are the 6th or 7th richest community state in the union.
Although it probably puts you in the top 10 or 15% in the country as far
that's
as
right.
income.
But in the state, right, within our state, there are lots of people earning at that level. Okay. Now, if you happen to be 24 and you're living at home with mom,
Yeah.
you're paying for nothing.
Yeah.
You're not paying for ambulances, schools, roads, nothing. You've got a free ride. You can, go off to the Cayman Islands a couple times a year. That nice girl you met in Boston last weekend, take her to Bermuda. You can do whatever you want, right? But the people who are hardest hit then, of course, are people with fixed income who own their houses, and then new people with new mortgages who are trying to, they have kids in school and all the rest of it. So I think
Let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
It seems like you're being a devil's advocate because you said that, our real estate taxes, I thought you led me to believe that maybe we should be paying more. But if we have so
in
many
real estate taxes, no.
Just to clarify that,
yeah.
because we have a lot of poor people in Manchester, especially at fixed income, or
Right.
people who are struggling, disabled people who can't really, they can't. Let's say they're paying, for instance, $5,000 a year in real estate
Right,
taxes.
right.
They can't spend $6,000. That's going to
Right.
put them under.
And we're down to 3 minutes, sadly. But yeah, but my point is that the system doesn't work. The system that we have today, and
How would you fix it?
or if it were up to me,
Yeah.
if it were me, then I'd introduce a broad-based tax. I'd eliminate, but I'd ensure that property taxes were reduced and all these fees we have of all, that got fixed and rebalanced. Because I just see it, and there are people, I remember Forbes, Steve Forbes, a Republican candidate back 10, 15 years ago, he proposed a flat tax of 17%.
Was
Right?
that high?
I think it was 17%, a flat tax, just have one tax. I don't, you can pick your poison, right? And your level, right? But and I don't like the flat tax issue, to be honest, because I prefer a more progressive tax scheme. But at least it's equitable. At least a flat tax is equitable. Even a sales tax is equitable. If you choose to buy a $10,000, boat, and the next guy buys a $100,000 boat, then
Let me
then
ask you,
only pay
what do you
that.
think the chances are of a sales tax or an income tax going
Zero.
Zero. Yeah.
Zero.
So
Zero. So
that's why we should do stuff like legalize cannabis.
Well,
and casino gambling.
What I'd love if we spend some time and energy on the issue of not argue about whether we have a problem or not, but rather saying what we're doing currently, we're not able to do the things for our school system that we should be doing. How do we fix it?
And how much time do we have?
No time. We're down to, I'm sure Kirsten will tell us. We got about 2 minutes, Kirsten.
All right, just
oh,
want to
one,
say
1 minute.
real quickly, and I'm glad you mentioned, you just refreshed my memory, but you brought this to my attention. I've done research. So we spend less than the average municipality on students, but we spend more than the average municipality on city services.
Correct.
And our city budgets are out of whack because. So if this is the average, our schools are down here, but our city's up
Right.
here. So how do we rebalance it?
Right.
Because if we rebalance that, we might be able to get more equity too.
That's true too. But that's where the conversation.
This is not just me guessing. I've gone to the New Hampshire Department of
Right.
Revenue and I've looked at what other cities are paying for city services and what they're paying.
We
for
had
school.
all the graphs done at Citizens for Manchester Schools and brought them before Ted and others to say no. The people didn't want to listen because they wanted to get down because we can't get out of the rut. Like I was saying here earlier, it was constantly about descending towns, and that's where the problem was. And the conversations, after they're about anything but the problem of how do we solve this funding problem. I'm sorry we're down to 30 seconds. Let's have you in and we'll do a chat. You're always welcome.
Thank you.
Because there's a problem there. People are interested in it. We should talk and find solutions for them.
The Fáilte
Ross, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for another evening, and welcome. I'm glad that Ross joined us. We'll see you next week. All the best. Bye bye.